This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm T.K. Kerstetter, Chairman of NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. And we're going to take a look today at, we call it a board alert, and we want to talk about the Washington, D.C. legislative tax issues and give a little update to everyone because it's an important issue for companies and for individuals, although we're not going to look at individuals today. But we are lucky to have an expert here to help us through this maze of issues. And please welcome Mel Schwarz, who's the partner and the Director of Tax Legislative Affairs for Grant Thornton LLP. Welcome, Mel.
Well, thank you. It's a delight to be here.
Well, we've got a lot to cover. So let's first start with what can companies and boards expect in 2014 vis-a-vis both the budget and tax reform?
I would say not too much. I think it's important not to overestimate what Congress is going to be able to do this year. We are in an election year. There is a history of contentiousness between the two parties. On the budget side, I think that we are likely to see a series of probably small successes that are designed to keep the country running, to keep business flowing. Certainly there is an interest on the part of the party that's in the White House right now to keep the economy humming as well as it can. And although there may be some elements of the party that is out of power that would prefer to, at this stage perhaps, make a point about some of their ideas, the party in general seems to be turning to an idea that they need to establish really their credibility that if it's their turn next time to run the government after the presidential election in 2016, that they are focused on, in fact, doing that. So on the budget side, don't expect anything big, but with regard to smaller events, that keep matters going, I don't think we're going to be looking for a government shutdown. There may be a few scary moments before we succeed in avoiding the government shutdown, or perhaps more importantly, the question of the debt, exceeding the debt limit. The signs are pointing to Congress being able to reach an agreement to keep that moving forward. On the tax side, I think there is likely less is going to be accomplished. We'll continue to talk about tax reform, but it is increasingly appearing unlikely that tax reform can be accomplished this year. With Ways and Means Chairman Baucus presumably leaving the Senate in maybe as little as a month in order to take his new position as ambassador to China, that certainly disturbs that system. And we have yet to really see all of the details that either the Senate or the House of Representatives would need to look at in order to accomplish a full-scale tax reform.
So Congress failed at year-end to extend many of the tax provisions. It was well publicized that expired on December 31st. So how does that failure to extend those provisions affect businesses? And if we were lucky enough that they did something retroactively, would that make the whole thing moot?
Well, it doesn't make the whole thing moot if we get a retroactive extension back to January 1 of 2014. I think that certainly most of us hope that we will see that kind of extension. And the tea leaves seem to be pointing in the direction that that is probably the most likely outcome. there might be a few exceptions. There were over 50 provisions that expired, tax provisions, that expired at the end of 2013. And some of them are very important credits that not only affect how companies set up their workforces, where companies invest, particularly in the research area. And those are tax changes that drop directly to the bottom line. So these are things that affect financial statements. It certainly makes it more difficult, I think, when Congress takes an approach of we don't need to deal with the extension of these provisions by the end of the year. It's okay to wait until sometime the next year and then retroactively extend them. Yes, we get our credits. Yes, we get our tax benefits. But let's say that they are not extended until sometime in April or May. Our first calendar year, first quarter, in the 10Q, we're not going to be able to reflect that benefit. And we say, okay, well, most of the investors probably in the United States understand that, yes, the research credit comes and it goes, and it's typically retroactively restored, and maybe they sort of read through that. But as we've moved to more and more of a worldwide investment system, the fact that a 10Q suddenly does not have a benefit such as a research credit in it may be more confusing perhaps to an investor that is not as attuned to the vagaries of the U.S. Congress as someone over here is.
We'll talk about multinational in a minute, but I sense some positiveness in your tone that you do think that these provisions will be extended sometime during the year.
These are very popular bipartisan provisions by and large that have expired. And part of the reason that Congress didn't get to them in 2013 is that the tax writing committees were focused on the idea of fundamental tax reform. They were not successful in really moving it forward, but that was where those members and their staffs were focused. And as long as they were talking about tax reform, there was a feeling that, well, we'll look at these these temporary provisions and determine which ones we should keep and make permanent and which ones we should let go. That process is essentially on hold until the tax reform effort begins to gather steam again. So what typically Congress has done in the past is just take the whole package and extend it for a year, possibly for 2 years, to essentially give them the time that they need to further the tax reform process and there take a look at things. There's one exception to the idea that they're likely to extend items, and that's the bonus depreciation. Because as you know, last year in 2013, any property that was placed in service, or most property that was placed in service, we could essentially deduct half the cost. We didn't have to delay the depreciation. That is a provision that might or might not be extended, even if the Congress goes in and ultimately extends these other provisions.
So you made reference to international and them not understanding sort of the research credit. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of multinational companies. Cover, if you will, just sort of the impact of what it means, with all this happening to a multinational company that not only does business in the U.S., but does business in other countries as well.
The whole tax reform, and it's not just the failure to come to final budget agreements, the failure to extend provisions. The whole tax reform process has established a significant amount of uncertainty with regard to where the taxation of the international activities of U.S. companies is going. And this is something that I think is shared not just by U.S. companies, but also by the multinationals of other countries. There is an increasing concern among governments that the tax base has been eroded. Profits have been shifted out of their countries where they think the tax should occur, or the country where the manufacturing occurs or where the labor force resides, into very low tax countries, so-called tax shelter countries, where perhaps intellectual property or other kinds of intangibles have been transferred. And we're seeing an increasing attention not only in the United States but also in foreign countries to concerns with that type of behavior. And I think that's something that members of boards really do need to be sensitized to, because here in the United States we've always taken the position, I think, that any tax you don't have to pay, that's good. And you're really, as long as you don't break the law, you're allowed to be as aggressive as you want. But when I talk to my counterparts in the foreign offices of the other member companies of Grant Thornton International, particularly in Europe, they are much more sensitive to what this kind of behavior can do to the brand that the company has, and a feeling that maybe I don't want to be as aggressive as perhaps I would otherwise be, because I do. If we've seen companies like Apple, we've seen companies like Starbucks on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, on the front page of the Financial Times, with how they have structured their affairs in order to avoid paying taxes in various jurisdictions. And that's not good publicity. And it's fine for me as a tax man to say, here's how I would design it for you to minimize tax. Board members need to, I think, have some feel for, well, maybe that's not always exactly what we want to do. There are other things that we as board members are responsible for. We're more responsible for the brand. The tax guy can be responsible for the tax.
Yeah, it's not only a challenge for the board, even a shareholder, and what they would hope the board would do would be mixed in that, because you're asking, to forgive some bottom line profit for the benefit of the brand. That's an argument in its own right.
That is an argument in and of itself, although I think that the counter argument to that is that if the value of the stock is based on a projection of the future earnings of the company out through infinity, defending the brand is very important with regard to those earnings out through infinity.
Yeah. But the real debate there is, because that isn't to be debated, you'd want reputation. The real debate is this really a knock against the brand?
And that is, I think, a determination that that everyone has to make on their own, with in their own exercise of judgment. Coming back to the tax reform process, certainly the concern with base erosion and profit shifting is one that we're going to see come up again and again as part of our U.S. efforts to reform the tax system. And so I think that adds an additional layer to particularly those companies that may be primarily domestic in their focus right now, but are looking to become worldwide, to include thoughts about how we might shift our rules in determining how they want to structure their affairs going overseas. Because that initial structure that you put in place is really the key element to determining how effective you're going to be in properly arranging your affairs, not only from a legal standpoint, but from a tax standpoint as well.
So we have about a minute and a half left here, and on this show we always try and give good advice to the board members that are our main audience. And so what would you say are the questions that a board should be asking management to understand, for example, that they have their arms around not only where the issues are now, but the issues that should be put in front of management and the board to make decisions on? What would you say to a board?
I would focus on questions that deal with significant changes that we might see in the tax laws, particularly in certain areas. We know that with regard to mineral extraction, with regard to the oil and gas industry, there may be some significant changes. Among some of the key areas that are under consideration for change, what would that effect be on our company for a cash flow standpoint as well as from a reported financial earnings standpoint? With regard to the international situation, I certainly think that a board member would want to make sure that the tax people are focusing on how the structure currently exists and what effect some of the potential changes could have on that structure. And as they go forward and determine additional structures, as additional intellectual property is developed, as additional markets are entered into, how will that fit not only into the existing system, but also how could that fit into a system if various of the changes that are being discussed were to be taken into account?
Well, I guess we're just going to have to watch and see what happens. I don't think anybody will be surprised if we don't see much action relative to some of the reform, but we would like to see action on those extensions. But I guess, Mel, we'll have to see. I appreciate you coming in and having the opportunity to update us on this topic that we don't get a chance a lot to dig into, but it's an important piece of someone's business plan. So thanks for joining us. And that will conclude this issue of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week to take a look at another critical topic that will help you be a better board member or committee member. And we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by NYSE Governance Services, Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.